So I want to touch on something that I think kind of runs counterintuitive to what a lot of people think. Good people get fired all the time. Mark Cuban was fired. Howard Stern was fired. There are cuts in staffing. I see stories where tech companies are laying off 10,000 people. Those are good employees. When I started the volume, one of the first breaks I got was that COVID had decimated many of these large media companies. And some of my employees, many of them here at the volume of our 27, 28 employees, worked at ESPN, DAZN, NBC Sports, CBS Sports. Very, very talented people. Just companies had to make budgets. There were some financial shortfalls, expectations. You know how it works at big companies. So we start with that. And this is true in sports, is that take coaching. The Kansas City Chiefs fired Marv Levy. He went on to get to 4 Super Bowls with the Bills. Many of you may remember this. The Jags fired Tom Coughlin. He went on to beat Belichick and Brady and outcoached them in 2 Super Bowls. So this happens. Ty Lue got fired by the Cavs. He got off to like an 0-6 start. Ty Lue's a top 7-8 coach in the NBA. Easily, maybe top 4 or 5. So when Frank Reich was fired by the Colts, it was a mistake by the organization. And I'll give you a little background on that. So we would all admit that about 70-75% of the NFL right now is coach quarterback. That's good. You can have flaws in other places. So Andrew Luck with Frank Reich, he had him for a year. How did Frank do with Andrew? Andrew Luck had missed the previous season due to an injury. His first and last year with Frank Reich, Andrew Luck had his career best in completion percentage, passer rating, 39 TDs, 15 picks, comeback player of the year, and made the Pro Bowl. He had his most efficient year, Andrew Luck did, with Frank Reich. Phillip Rivers, from the previous year with the Chargers, went 5-11. With Frank Reich, went 11-5. His passer rating went from 88 to 97. His interceptions, always an issue with Rivers, went from 20 to 11. Phillip Rivers had his most efficient year in the last several with Frank Reich. Let's go to Carson Wentz. Now, you roll your eyes at Carson Wentz. But the 1 year that Frank Reich had Carson Wentz, he went from 3-8-1 with the Eagles as a starter to 9-8. He went from a 16 touchdown, 15 pick ratio to 27 TDs and 7 picks. His passer rating jumped from 72 to 94.6. So 3 different quarterbacks, Andrew Luck, Phillip Rivers, and Carson Wentz, had significant upgrades in efficiency, completion percentage, and turnovers dropped. And the Colts fired him. The Jags fired Tom Coughlin. The Cowboys moved off Jimmy Johnson. The Browns/Ravens moved off Bill Belichick. Marv Levy got bounced by the Chiefs. Frank Reich is a really good coach. Carolina got a good one. They have an excellent defense, specifically in the front 7, with talented young corners in the back end. DJ Moore's a nice receiver. They got to rebuild the O-line a little, not terrible, get themselves a quarterback. I think Carolina stole the Indianapolis Colts mistake. And this all goes back to the meddling of Jim Irsay. If I said to you meddling owners in the NFL the last decade, 4 jump out to me. The old Al Davis, Dan Snyder, Jerry Jones, and recently in the last year, Jim Irsay. Look at the results in all of those. Disappointment, underachieving, despite having talent on the roster. A steal. So this week, Charles Barkley went on the TNT show during an NBA game and railed on the players for star players for missing starts. And it's called load management. It has become the biggest issue that Adam Silver, the NBA commissioner, faces. Star players sitting out, won't play back-to-backs. Now, some in the media view that as too pro-owner and too anti-player. And I'll give you an example. One of my favorite baseball players growing up was George Brett. And I remember looking at George Brett's stats one time years and years ago, and Brett missed like 30 games a year. And I thought, oh, wow. But remember, George Brett played on AstroTurf in the summer in Kansas City. That effing field was 130 degrees. Players took more time off. The resources, nutrition, training methods, playing on AstroTurf. When players were missing games in the 70s, 80s, 90s, there was a sense they were doing it to rehab their body. Steve Garvey told me years ago that when he played on AstroTurf, his cleats occasionally stuck to the field. He had to constantly move his feet. So when a baseball player now on grass fields, is missing 30 games, it does feel different. Nutritional standards, training methods, resources, teams, private jets. In fact, you're seeing this in the NFL, that home field advantage in the NFL is no longer 3.5 points. And the reason being, Washington Post detailed this in an article, is that essentially with team planes, players have more space. They set up training centers at the hotel within an hour of landing. Is that the truth is road teams don't have, this isn't a disservice to the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. It's a reality of the advancements of the league. You can go on the road and you get equal treatment to at home. Fewer distractions, better planes, more rest, better hydration, more trainers, better trainers. Home field advantage in the NFL has less impact. So where I side with Barkley is that when an older NBA player, a Wilt, they used to fly commercial. You'd get on a plane out of Seattle, 6 a.m, you could be sitting with the Lakers. They flew commercial. And if a guy missed 15 games in the 70s, 80s, 90s, a lot of it was because they just didn't have the resources to take care of their body. That's why you see so many older NBA players, Phil Jackson, crouched over, bent over. They're beat up physically. They don't age particularly well. Their backs don't, their shoulders don't. So it does feel different today when Jokic can't play a back-to-back. It's not just the salary. Athletes are treated better. Emotionally, physically, it's an easier life. It's not just resentment toward the salary. I do think load management is a huge problem in the NBA. I would love for the league to cut out back-to-backs because I grew up in a small town. And when I was a kid, and if I went to a Sonic game, a Seattle Sonics game, and downtown Freddie Brown and Gus Williams and DJ or Jack Sigma didn't play, it was a bummer. I went specifically to the Kingdome to watch Larry Bird against my Sonics. And so I think the criticism by Barkley is reasonable. Some will say, well, Charles at the end of his career was missing, he was missing like 20, 25 games. Even at the end of Barkley's career, which is fairly recent, bodies were treated differently. You didn't have the staff size or the expertise on nutrition, training, and you couldn't implement it as quickly or as often.